today's subject is going to be on evapotranspiration insights, comparative analyses, and practical applications for ag water management. So a lot to unwrap and uncover there. I'll just introduce myself as your moderator. My name is Mac Friedrichs. I work with the USGS AROS Data Center. That's the Earth Resources Observation and Science Data Center in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. If you've heard of AROS, maybe it's in relation to the Landsat archive. AROS is located in Sioux Falls, as I said, and it's the home of the Landsat archive. They do a lot of ground system control there, Landsat calibration, validation, data intake and dissemination, and they also have a science division there. So I've been with them for over 10 years, and I've worked primarily within the ET and water space with Dr. Gabriel Sine on the OpenET science team. I'm one of the technical leads with the CBOT model, which is completely irrelevant at this moment, but our panel of experts here are going to present a masterclass on their subjects. I myself am not so much in the technical domain anymore. I'm not a domain expert, more so on the managing of the different coordination aspects with our work, but definitely excited to come to conferences like this and see you guys and learn from each other. So the community aspect is a huge piece of it. And I encourage you guys to listen, take notes, and ask lots of questions, either to myself or the folks here that will be presenting today. We have an hour and a half, and we'll go ahead and get started. I want to introduce our first speaker, Pamela Nagler. She has worked with the USGS Southwest Biological Science Center in Tucson, Arizona since 2005. Prior to USGS, she studied at the University of Maryland, receiving her master's in geography and remote sensing, and worked at the USDA Agricultural Research Service in Beltsville, Maryland. After working at a remote sensing lab at the National Institute for Environmental Research in Japan, she moved to Tucson for a PhD in soils, water, and environmental sciences at the University of Arizona. Her current research on quantification of evapotranspiration using vegetation index methods in uncultivated and natural ecosystems has the potential to improve water partitioning within human and natural environments and the governing of resources for wildlife and healthy habitat. So with that, thank you, Pamela, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Mac. Okay, so I have to say, I have my mullet outfit. I've got my East Coast top, and then I've got my West Coast pants. So I have too many words on my slides because USGS likes when we put things that are going to get recorded and posted on media, some kind of social media. So I just want to say that I'm not going to read them all, but the reading is in case anybody not in the room wants to come back and look at that. Okay, I have to have an outline. I will talk a little bit longer, but I'm still going to leave room for the OpenET portion of it at the end. So I just will go through uncultivated landscapes and drylands. My work is not based on thermal data. It's all optical vegetation index-based ET. And we need measuring and monitoring trends for riparian zones in particular. And the reason is because they are the 95 to 98% of species are living and needing the water and the shade and the habitat in these riparian corridors across the West. So this is just a little graphic from my USGS friend, John Bradford, and of course the little state of Arizona is highlighted as, you know, all these climate projections of the hottest, driest areas. And this bottom graph with purple is showing the soil water potential. And so we see as temperatures increase, soil moisture is going down. And I'll just go and tell you a little bit about, we all know about the damming and altered rivers and partitioning between environmental uses and human uses. And one of the reasons to look at these changes in actual ET over time is because of the, changes in precipitation and seasonal patterns, the diverted water, the overbanked flooding that is needed to germinate native seeds. We look at defoliation and habitat destruction, particularly from things like the tamarisk beetle, but there's lots of types of beetles that are defoliating our nice green landscape. And of course, fire and post-fire is one of the big issues. The other thing is that it's been in the news quite a bit recently where you have so many days of over 100, 110 degree days over time. So just real briefly, Ward Sanford and Selnick did this paper in 2013, 2012, and they're talking about how the best estimates of actual ET for the CONUS era data was done in this region, and it shows that in the Southwest, it's 80 to 95% of precipitation in drylands is the percentage of ET. And so it's really critical that we get our estimates right in these drylands. So just one of the idols that I'm going to meet one day is Meredith Reitz, and she worked with my friend Gabriel Sine and Ward to look at how these continental models between the water balance and CBOP data were coming out in terms of continental estimates. And again, you can see these in the drylands. It's been a real challenge to accurately cross this in spatiotemporal scales. But again, they even concluded about 70% or more of precip is part of the ET equation. So we're not going to get too much into the technical stuff. I'm going to give you a really fast review paper to say that Christine Albano works with Justin Huntington and others at DRI, came out with this really important reason that we need to get accurate estimates of the potential amount of water use. And so as we go through, all of my estimates are, have to include potential water use, but if you can't accurately define it within, very narrow bands, we want to get it at 5 to 20% accuracy. It's really hard then. And part of that is that basically ET is the second largest term in the terrestrial water balance, and so it's important that as global warming happens that we start getting these accuracies improved in the drylands. So just to let you know that I'm kind of a narcissist, and I'm trying to get away from that, but I decided to name things after myself. So I have this thing that we were calling like ET based on vegetation indices. And so basically we had to shorten it and just call it the Nagler, and we call it the finagling ET because it might not be too accurate compared to all the open ET ones, but I'll show you that at the end. So just to let you know that I've worked on Nagler ET in both agricultural and uncultivated land covers like riparian, shrubland, sagebrush, grasslands, rangelands, and even urban green spaces. So one of the more exciting things is this riparian zone, because it's 95% of the, not just avian species for flyways, but all different kinds of critters live there because of the shade and the moisture that's so important. So the Navajo Nation, this picture of Shanto Wash, we can see a nice, pretty riparian zone. And there they're called culturally important riparian areas that are really critical for preserving basically a spiritual site. And they're also looking at groundwater-dependent ecosystems, their springs, and how important it is for restoration to get the right water quantified so that we can do these restoration projects correctly. So I want to point out Dara Roberts out of Santa Barbara. He's got a whole group of really smart riparian people. And I should just say that I am not a hydrologist. I am in the biology center, but I'm also a geographer. So for me, it's really important that we collaborate with people that are, other ivory towers in science. And so Dara Roberts, they have a new paper in remote sensing environment called A River Runs Through It, and it's about automated mapping of these riparian wetlands. And I'll show you that I've actually stupidly spent hours with my people hand digitizing all the riparian corridors in the lower Colorado River Basin. That's about 15 rivers. And matching that up with his paper where they looked at the San Pedro for that particular thing. So now this is the long part, but we're going to fly through this. There's a short history of the empirical equation development, and we know that not just the ones on OpenET, but you have all these different approaches. And mine falls under empirical models, very simple. I'm not an engineer, I'm not even a hydrologist. And I just wanted to say that we have all these things like Priestley-Taylor and Penman-Monteith and Blaney-Criddle. And Blaney-Criddle is sort of like the one for stupid people because it's so simple and it has to be monthly. But the important part is when you can't get potential ET, these really, like Albano said, like if you can't get ETO right, then it's really hard to get ETA right, or actual ET. So I just want to say that in many of the places I'm working, in the border in Mexico and even here on the Rio Grande, where people took down like 150-foot towers, things get stolen. and on the whole Navajo Nation, which is like the entire northeast corner of Arizona into New Mexico and Utah, and even in southwest Colorado, it's really hard because it's uninstrumented. And so Blaney Criddle is one of the reasons we went that way, and I'll show you that in the end. But I'll tell you, Ed Glenn did the empirical and statistical versus the physical theoretical. He wrote about 4 reviews in about 4 years. And now we have open ET, but I want to let you know that all of the work on my little narcissistically named ET equation was sap flow, or it was done with eddy flux towers. It was done with neutron hydroprobes, and also looking at lysimeter data for that. And so there's all these complicating, difficult Greek things. And I just want to say that that was part of the summary in these reviews, but this will be the only slide I kind of tell you what's written, and that's because uncultivated land covers seem to lack focus from the ET community because there was a lack of the measured, validated, calibrated ET methods. And this was due to ag water use is the majority of all water use. The global ET products have real large errors in drylands, and we had this crop coefficient method that came from like the Susan Moran and Toby Carlson methods of trapezoid and triangle methods. So I borrowed those, and well, Susan Moran was my advisor, so I sort of had to borrow them and use them and apply them to uncultivated landscapes. So I came up with these concepts that are just, vegetation index based. And at that time, EVI, the enhanced one, was so much better, but it was made for MODIS, which was a lot too coarse for riparian zones. So I'll just let you know that we then modified it and put it in Landsat, and if anybody can help me put it in Sentinel, this would be great. But I don't have any people, so we'll talk about that afterwards. I was told at AGU I could ask for money, so that's fine. So I'll just let you know that EVI on the bottom here is stretched, and so it does, the end EVI saturates at the high ends, and that's high LAI, but in the riparian corridor, you do have high LAI. So very fast. So in 2003, we started looking at some of the riparian species about the actual angles of the leaf. And canopy transpiration is part of multiplicative scattering through the canopy. And we started doing things like taking every leaf off of things and looking at leaf area and then LAI measurements and scaling this with sap flow. And then looking at transpiration projected on the ground. And this is a lot of work. So I'm wanting to tell you about my future. After I had 4 kids, I had to stay at home. So now I've made it all remote sensing. So I'm just going to flip through this and tell you we did ET estimates for riparian plants, because there's this community of people that really doesn't like invasive species. And then we have our native plants, but it's really based all on your leaf area. And your temperatures, and we were able to develop an equation, and then we did stem flow, sap flow, and projected those ET estimates with the soil moisture eddy flux and bone ratio, and we were able to look at the impact of salt tolerance. We also then decided that riparian corridors are not the end all. They have other places like where Atriplex or Sarcobatos, the greasewood, seepwood, saltbush that we saw coming in. All on the plains here are these 4-wing saltbush. These are all over this landscape that is not necessarily covered in riparian zones. So we decided that we had other sensors that we would test and do this on different species. So along the way, we decided to include agriculture because it was popular to do that. And we had cotton fields. We did it on alfalfa, but we also had flooded and unflooded riparian species from Jamie Cleverly on the Rio Grande here. And we were able to hook up and get our refined ET method. So in applications, I have this guy friend who's Chris Jarko, who Ed Glenn, my favorite mentor, when he died, he's like, well, Chris was always my favorite student. So Chris is now working for Department of Energy for legacy mine sites and the uranium mine tailings. We now use drones to calculate ET for these riparian corridors. And I'm just going to let you know this study on the whole entire Navajo Nation, we calculated potential ET and then actual ET and did a consumptive water use for this entire region. And the reason I was able to do this is we said that soil moisture is negligible. That might not be true, but just to let you know, it made it really easy. So Chris then came up with ways to look at groundwater flux from these phytoremediation species, sucking out the contaminants on the legacy mine sites. But he came up with a new equation for sagebrush steppe. And then in another application, we're just looking at like 25 years of riparian corridor declines on the lower Colorado River main stem, but also into Mexico. And people are putting so much effort into restoration, these nice little square plots that the birds maybe are trying to ignore, but it doesn't quite look like the top picture of native. But one of the things to point out is that black line is like the average, and then year by year, you can see it's losing its phenology, it's using its green canopy cover, and we're calculating 34% declines. And on the US side, and on Mexico, because you know the river actually ends in Mexico, we have this 38% decline calculated for ET. And so part of what I'm able to do is to look at how restoration is being, look, it worked. Look, it's like going up from the pulse flow over here in the orange, and it's like increasing in the restored sites, but the problem with the rest of the unrestored riparian corridors, we still have these giant losses, and it could be from salinity or beetle defoliation or any number of things like border patrol and fires and other issues in the dry lands on the border. And this is the consumptive use estimation that we did at Hopi Reservation. It's inside the Navajo area, and there's some litigation going on, and so we were able to calculate a best approximation consumptive use. So just to let you know, equations 1 to 6 are done. They're in the past, and we're still trying to improve things because I have to work for like another 100 years because I have a 4-year-old. And so just to let you know that this is where we say the Occam's razor is the choose the easiest path of 2 competing paths. So mine's the easiest of all the open ET ones. And we were able to then substitute gridded day met for the potential ET and calculated with Blaney Criddle. So I'm just going to tell you, choose the easiest path. NADA, I don't know why they didn't call it, instead of MET ET with meteorological ET, it should be NET ET, and she could have named it after herself. So NADA is working on the drought product in Europe, and we are, she was able to come up with another coefficient correction factor because she used validation from 15 towers around the world in the global crop water model. So I would say use any of these, and I will quickly go through some recent applications, and then I promise I'm going to give you time. Yeah, okay. So, all right, this is, so these are all NADA's papers, and first she started in the Zayanarud basin in the central part of Iran and was able to look at getting this up on a platform with Google Earth Engine. And then this is where she compared it with wheat data from ARS. And she recommended that we use this ET-EVI algorithm. And basically, she took my Nagler algorithm and then did it with the towers, corrected it for the lower Colorado Basin, and was able to do this with just a simple coefficient correction. And then she compared it with OpenET. So this is the OpenET portion. I promise I'm going to stop talking. So just to let you know, it performed really well against all of them. You can see where the E metric was higher, like the previous session said. CBOP was higher. But in general, this compared relatively perfectly with the rest of the OpenET. And so she's developed it and now has it on Google Earth Engine using the global crop water model. And I could have shown you the picture, but it's in Arabic. So it's interesting because it's basically up and running. And then I'll just let you know that then I got Gabriel's data, and we compared for the lower river CBOP to NADA's to mine, and this is how it performed between the top is the unrestored, and then the middle part was with unrestored, the 3 for OpenET, and then the restoration sites. And these are just all the data all together. So it's not too far off. We did this reach by reach because we wanted to look at management schemes and the amount of restoration. And so you can see here just the conclusion is basically that these are a comparison with the restoration plots, and basically my equation is higher than CBOP, and natives is in between. So we're looking at how to compare that with the rest of the open ET ones. And this is just to say we did this for a lot of the rivers in Sonora, Mexico with the hand-digitized boundaries. And you can see these trends up and down. And the next stage is to look at how we would be able to calculate what they're due to. Okay, so just to show you the platform, we built a data explorer for all of our end partners across DOI, but all the other agencies, especially all the NGOs in Mexico and other parts of the world, to be able to come in and be able to search themselves. So we make these change maps over time, but that's very simple stuff. And I just want to say that we have 3 special issues if anyone is interested for remote sensing, for dryland sustainability, and this is a part of the Science Partner Journal. We have one in hydrological processes on groundwater-dependent ecosystems and looking at field-based studies like I've shown you. And OpenET is included in this. We can look at this, how that compares. And then I have one in monitoring ecohydrology. And then EGUs, we hold, this will be our 8th year. Every year we have an ET session at EGU in case you guys want to escape to Vienna. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Pam. Can tell it took a lot to restrain yourself from speaking on all the slides you have at great lengths. You do a great job, though, and yeah, appreciate all the years of experience and expertise you've brought within the field of ET as well. I want to keep on moving and get to our next speaker, Dr. Kyle Knipper. He is a research scientist at the USDA ARS Sustainable Agricultural Water Systems Unit in Davis, California. His work focuses on the evaluation and refinement of remote sensing-based models to provide spatially representative measures of crop water use and stress for operational applications in irrigation and field management. Kyle is working closely with vineyard, almond, and olive growers in the state of California to incorporate these satellite-derived parameterization into their water management strategies. So, thank you, Kyle.
Thanks, Mac. Hi, everyone. As Mac said, my name is Kyle Knipper. I'm a research scientist in Davis, California for the ARS. And today I'm going to be talking about a comparative analysis of OpenET for evaluating evapotranspiration in California for irrigation management. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about and the sites that I'm going to be talking about are part of a larger group effort to study a lot more than just satellite-based validation, including tree-level research, field-level research, including UAV and drones, as well as the satellite portion. But again, today I'm going to be focusing on the satellite portion. So, So for context, this all started with the project GrapeX back in 2013, which ultimately led to the project called T-Rex. Yes, we love our acronyms within the ARS, which started because we wanted to better model satellite-based ET over these very unique canopy structures, specifically wine grape vineyards in GrapeX and tree perennial crops, most notably almond orchards in T-Rex. And we initially started doing this using the Lexi-Dislexi ET model, and the reasoning behind that is because it's based on the two-source energy balance model. So what it's actually capable of doing is taking a thermal signal and partitioning it into soil and canopy portions, and then we're able to simultaneously solve the energy balance equation both for E and T and sum them up in the end. Again, important from a standpoint of almond orchards and wine grape vineyards, because you can see with the pictures there, there's very clearly tree rows and interrows, so important to quantify both those aspects. I'm not, it's not going forward, Matt.
It wasn't full screen. There we go. There we go. Had to click over there.
Oh, cool. All right. So like I said, Grapex, we actually started this with a collaboration with E&J Gallo Winery, which is the world's largest family-owned winery. We had vineyards located up in Sonoma County, down through the Central Valley at our site in Sierra Loma, which is just south of Sacramento, and then all the way down towards our Ripperdan site in Fresno, California. We've actually recently expanded the Grapex network to include regenerative vineyards located near Santa Rosa in Northern California. And this was a partnership with Jackson Family Wines. They have an initiative to transition all of their vineyards, which is about 30,000 acres, to regenerative by the year 2030. If we focus on T-Rex, we have our sites here in collaboration with the Almond Board of California as well as OFI. Again, trying to span the entire Central Valley of California. We have 2 sites located up near Davis, California, and another also near Fresno, California. And we have also recently expanded the T-Rex umbrella to also include olive ranches. So we partnered with California Olive Ranch. We now have 4 flex towers within those olive orchards in Northern California, 2 of which on the right there in our Oroville site are located within regenerative olive orchards. So if we focus on Grapex, again, it was the original project looking to evaluate satellite-based ET in these types of agricultural systems. What's unique about Grapex and the sites is that we can go back quite a few years. This is looking at 6 years of data. For Sierra Loma in the middle, we can actually go further back. But just for clarity here, I have the same years. And what we find is really good correlations between OpenET ensemble, which is the red line there, and observations in blue. And a point of note, which is interesting, after the 2019 season for Sierra Loma there, they actually regrafted their vines to a new varietal, and you can see that pulse in ET, but within a year, back up to normal measurements. From a comparison standpoint, strong correlations, low errors within all 3 of these sites. You can see ET estimates increasing from the north on top to the south within the Central Valley on the bottom. And ultimately, overall at all sites, again, strong correlations and low mean absolute errors hovering around that 1 millimeter per day mark. If we focus back in on T-Rex, we actually just submitted a paper to Ag and Forest Met looking at a comparison of OpenET to almond orchards within the Central Valley of California. So we have our 3 T-Rex sites, which are on the left, and we also included 3 additional almond orchards, which are a part of the Ameriflex network, and were also included in John Volk's recent paper. And in doing such a comparison, we find good relations between observed ET and modeled ET. So the observed ET is on the x-axis, modeled is on the y. For all models included in the OpenET framework, the ensemble is on the top in black, and then combined almond orchards is on the right axis there. And what we really find is there's not a huge difference between the models in OpenET, but rather between the almond orchards that are studied. So if we just focus in on the ensemble, again, what you find time and time again is when you go from the northern half of the Central Valley to the southern half of the valley, which would be going left to right here, you see those increases in ET rates, again, to be expected. And we also find some interesting patterns. One of them is that Vacaville site, the second from the left, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But overall, strong correlations. There is a bit of a tail at high ET rates. But again, overall, R squared is about 0.81, and that mean absolute error value sitting around 1 millimeter per day, which, if you will remember, aligns with what we were seeing in the vineyards. So that's good. If we scale up from daily to weekly to monthly, weekly being a bit more appropriate from an irrigation management standpoint, statistics improving, as well as monthly, that's probably just time averaging, helping out with those statistics. And we can compare those again to Dr. John Volk's recent paper. And what we find is actually statistically a little worse off than those values that were reported by John for the orchards within his paper, as well as all crops, which included both perennials and non-perennials. One of the sites that we're having a real issue with is this Vacaville site. So what you're seeing here is, in the red line is the OpenET ensemble, and blue is observations. And Vacaville is located right next to Travis Air Force Base. So it's this like bare, dry landscape. And we have predominant winds that come from that landscape. And what it's doing is creating this influx of energy over the irrigated orchard. And the orchard's well irrigated, so it's going to meet that demand. So we find observed ET rates are really, really high compared to other orchards with similar, biomass and leaf area index in them. Well, we also find, from a satellite perspective, we're just looking straight down. It's a 2D application, so the pixel in that barren landscape and the pixel in the almond orchard, it's not learning from either or of those pixels. So the satellite-based product doesn't know that this added energy is coming into the orchard, so values remain muted. In addition to that, what we found was, so in OpenET, those ET estimates are interpolated using reference ET. In California, we use the CIMMYS network. And what we found was the closest CIMMYS station in Davis had vapor pressure deficit values, so a measure of advection, that were consistently lower than the vapor pressure deficit estimates that were measured at Vacaville. And in that case, the higher the VPD, the larger the error. And what we found was when it came to like reference ET, including those vapor pressure deficit estimates, values were lower than what we would expect them to be at Davis compared to Vacaville. So all these values being used to interpolate Landsat pixels were essentially muted compared to what we were seeing on site. So again, just something that interesting to be aware of when evaluating these products. Something else that we saw, and it's not as prominent in every site or every year, but we did notice this interesting comparison between OpenET and our observations during hole split. So this is our site OLA down near Fresno, and hole split is a period in late July, August, September when growers pull back their irrigation quite a bit to dry out the hull of the almond, as well as dry off the almond floor for harvest. And what we find is our OpenET values really decrease very quickly during this time period. The modeled values also decrease, but not really at the clip that we'd like to see. So if there is a positive bias between model and observed, we find that it tends to be in this late July, August, September time period that coincides again with hole split and harvest in almonds. So I've been making a lot of comparisons between modeled values and observed values or measured values, but I think it's important to take time to really understand what the measurements mean and the error in the measurements. So what you see here is 2023 data for our almond orchard near Fresno, California. The yellow line is the ensemble with the spread around that for OpenET, and the blue is average of 4 different methods of estimating observed or measured ET on the surface, and you can see the approaches that we took there on the left. And what we found, at least for this year, for 2023, for our OLA site, we find that measurement and model uncertainties have similar magnitudes. They're in different times of the year, but they're similar, which is really important when people talk about the ensemble uncertainty and can we trust the values. What we're finding here is you also have to be able to trust your measurements on the ground and your observations. We also find that a lot of the biases between model and observations come at the tail ends. We think probably cloud cover, smoke, other factors playing into that cover crop. But during peak irrigation times, when you really need reliable ET information, it's doing a very good job. In addition to doing the comparison of OpenET to our eddy covariance sites, we also focused on 148 operational almond orchards for water year 21 and 22, and we compared to applied irrigation and precipitation. And we realized this isn't like the perfect comparison. We're not taking into account deep percolation or runoff or anything, but we still thought a valuable exercise. So this is what we got. So irrigation and precipitation is on the x-axis, ensemble ET is on the y-axis. The color bar there is plant date for the almond orchard. And what we find, again, is a fairly strong correlation. I was actually a bit surprised at how well correlated they were, and a percent difference of roughly 13%. And if we broke it down into almond age, what we found was OpenET actually underestimates irrigation and precipitation by upwards of 20% in those young orchards. This is not surprising. Young orchards are notorious for over-irrigation, so they can reach production age quicker. They also don't have a lot of biomass. But as you can see, once the biomass increases, you get into those more mature almond orchards, 10 to 15, a little on 15 to 20. Those are peak production years for almonds. We're sitting around that mean percent difference error of 13%. Again, so I want to refocus on Grapex just for a minute, specifically the two sites that we expanded to. This data, the observed data, was just processed on Friday, so we haven't had a lot of time to really dig into it. But comparisons are really, really promising. So the black line there is the ensemble with the model range around it for OpenET, blue line being observed. So again, we haven't had a lot of time to dig into it, but just as an initial look, this is super promising, particularly for a regenerative vineyard where there's a lot of biomass in these systems, a lot of different types of biomass. It's not just the vine canopy, but grasses as well. Again, our expansion into California Olive Ranch, so we just processed this 2023 data, and the statistics aren't as great. Again, we need to dive into why we're seeing what we're seeing, but there seems to be a lot more noise and a lot more biases when comparing to the olive orchards that we have as part of our project. I do need to note that this bottom site here, we don't expect it to do very well because it's actually just a bunch of twigs out in the field. So what they do at California Olive Ranch is when they want to rejuvenate a site or start over, instead of replanting the entire orchard, they go around with a chainsaw and just cut it off at about 3 feet high. So that's what you're seeing there. But we wanted to, because this is a regenerative orchard, we wanted to put an eddy covariance tower in here because within 2-3 years, they're going to be at production age. And we want to see that carbon uptake, that ET, that water use as these trees grow out. So that performance down there is kind of to be expected. And one last thing that we're working on, and I think this is really where rubber meets the road, particularly with OpenET, is we partnered with RTI International and the Almond Board of California to provide an economic evaluation on the transition from business as usual, which is an ETC-based approach, crop coefficients, to something that looks more like OpenET, so actual ET, and what that looks like and how much water and money growers can save by doing that. So we took what we knew from our T-Rex project and our grower collaborators. We talked with them. We worked through different scenarios, assumptions with everyone. You can kind of see there on the left is an adoption rate, so percentage of growers that are taking in this information and using it throughout the years. We have different scenarios based on a wet year or a dry year. That's going to affect the cost of water. And what we found was, a range between $23.5 and $73.5 million per year that can be saved by farmers by transitioning from an ETC-based approach to ETA or OpenET. So that's all I have, but I do want to note it's a very collaborative effort on the work that's ongoing in these projects. There's a lot of brilliant people and scientists working on it, so I definitely want to give them the credit where credit's due too. But thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kyle. It's a very comprehensive effort and one that's very well received by everyone involved. Make sure you guys are writing down some questions and saving them for the end from each of these talks, for each of these speakers.